Dave, you live in rural Pennsylvania. Simon lives in the National Capital Region, which is where lots of stuff happens. He winks because he's in Richmond, but that's National Capital Region to those of us who are in real America. So here's my question. You live out in like deer hunter country, but you work for a tech company and you're working remotely. So when you run into other people from your community, is it like, are you the aberration or are you the norm now? Like remote work, tech work type stuff, or how does that blend in with deer hunter country?
Yeah, it's funny. It's about every other, where I live, it's about every other house, right? It's either somebody mining coal or making steel in the few remaining coal or steel jobs around here, or it's somebody like me that is working from home, or treating where I live like a exurb of the National Capital Region, where it's just a lot cheaper to live there.
Yeah, no kidding. You're within like a couple of hours of National Capital Region. Yeah.
Yeah. So yeah, 3-ish.
3 hours. Yeah. I know. Okay. I don't know about you, Simon. I'm guessing it's different, but I live out in Montana, and between 2020 and 2024, there was a significant segment of the population of my state that was sure that Donald Trump was still the president, that COVID never happened, et cetera, et cetera. And it's just, outside of the coastal metropolises, it gets weird, but also it's real out here. Do you have any observations?
At peak COVID, I flew when the planes were still empty, and I was still a government employee. I was instructed to get the COVID vaccine before it was available to the wider populace, and I flew to Billings, Montana. And I landed in Billings, and a friend of mine who is much more politically savvy than I am said, "Hey, go ahead and take off that mask." And that's what I did. And I found it's actually not that hard to switch between real America and whichever America it is that I live in. They're remarkably similar people everywhere that you go. There's just subtle differences, right? Like proclivity for masking.
There was somebody in Billings, Montana who was more politically savvy than you. I find that hard to believe.
It was my then boss.
Oh, your boss. Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, and you worked for a Democratic senator. I'm surprised you didn't keep the mask on as kind of a virtue signal statement.
That doesn't really fly a whole lot in Montana. I actually think that virtue signaling doesn't fly in person ever. I think that it just is a generally disingenuous way to like conduct yourself. And my then boss at the time, I think, was very good at just being the third generation Montanan that he was. Yeah. He's wearing a defunct minor league Montana baseball league team hat. He has it in his blood. So yeah, it's not too hard to make that code switch, to use the parlance of our times. It's just common sense, which, not as common as we'd all like it to be, I suppose.
Yeah. Yep. True. On the topic of Pennsylvania, though, Dave, I don't know if you want to keep riffing here, but hopefully this isn't a virtue signal. And I'll say up front, we don't do ad reads here, but I reserve the right to talk about products that I really like. I am wearing a Buck Mason t-shirt.
You really like Buck Mason.
I really do like Buck Mason. I thought it was dumb. It was kind of like marketed to me as like, next level, high quality, whatever, American made textile. And man, they're the most comfortable t-shirts I've ever owned. And that's Monton, Pennsylvania. I think that's northwest of Philly, east of Harrisburg or something. Dave, you might know better than I will, but Buck Mason, whatever, factories out there.
Interesting. Yeah, so their factories are in Pennsylvania. The company itself is founded in California.
Sure.
Yeah. Sure. Now we've got to get you a case of Yingling Black and Tan, and you'll be right at home when you come and help me with that. To your point, the group that gathers around the fire pit from the let's call it a neighborhood. We'll go out on a limb and call it a neighborhood.
You don't call it the Holler. You don't call it the Holler.
What we do, honestly, it is a holler. It's a valley.
Yeah.
So when the holler gathers back around my fire pit and are drinking Yingling Black and Tan wearing your favorite Buck Mason clothing brand. I don't know. I think the answer is I just let them believe whatever they need to believe when they're at my house.
Tolerance, dude. Tolerance.
I will be whichever my neighbors want me to be, regardless of proclivity, without like betraying my beliefs.
Simon, what's your problem with me wearing Buck Mason? You don't like that?
I just I can't say there's anything about Buck Mason that makes me feel anything.
Great. Then let it go. Let me wear something that makes me feel good.
Just surprised to find that there's a real love for Buck Mason. I feel like there's an infinite number of straight-to-consumer online clothing companies of sorts, some of which I do buy. I own some Tacova boots. Like, I get it. But there's so many of them that I don't know that I feel strongly about any of them.
I mean, I don't feel strongly about Buck Mason per se. I just really like how comfortable these shirts are. I cannot believe, and I didn't know that it was going to be. I didn't know that it was going to be like a marked, notable difference between this and the average T-shirt, which I know that you like a certain set of
I love a T-shirt.
T-shirts.
Yeah, I mean, I'm willing to be converted to a comfortable T-shirt. I got a whole drawer just comfortable T-shirts, which I assume all people do. I don't know if that's normal or not.
Oh no, everybody has them, whether they care to admit it or not. Yeah, that's true. Last thing, Dave, you kept saying black and tan, Yingling. I'll admit that I'm not a Yingling drinker, but I always thought a black and tan was a Guinness plus a Harp. Am I wrong, or is that right?
I'm pretty sure it is Guinness and Harp, or Guinness and Harp sounds right. And the bartender pours the two in the same glass, but Yingling makes a very popular pre-bottled version. Then when it's poured, does some natural separation. Yeah.
Wow, the things you learn.
That I never really cared to know.
Right. Right. The esoterics of rural alcohol consumption. Yeah. Okay. Well, with that, perhaps we'll launch into today's discussion. So, this is the Goat Rodeo. It's a podcast discussion amongst three guys who think they know what they're talking about. We all come from military backgrounds. We all work for the same tech company selling software into the defense and public safety markets. And with our military backgrounds, we sometimes get off on banters and tangents that resonate with certain communities and don't with some others. But we try and talk about kind of news of the day as it pertains to the innovation economy, startup ecosystem, venture capital, and the national security and policymaker environment. And we've got a few things that we want to talk about today. I just want to start off with maybe a couple of reflections on things that have happened in the past week for us and our company that might be interesting. Maybe they won't be, but both have to do with foreign military sales, deployment of our technology overseas, and how we interact with overseas partners. At one point, we thought that with all kind of the Trumpy, Doji kind of stuff going on in the United States, that maybe the international environment and market would be a better place for us to sell our technology into, an easier on-ramp or a pressure release valve for doing business in a growing environment of uncertainty here in the U.S. But we heard two things last week. First, from one of our overseas, I'll call it a NATO customer or partner, an expression of, we don't know if you and your country are going to be reliable partners going forward. That was shocking to hear from, a buyer, a counterpart, to us, a defense technology company. We're not policymakers, but that expression to us, I think, is notable. Secondly, some of our partners in the satellite, orbital space platform, space data environment was told in no uncertain terms by the Trump administration to turn off their sales to Ukraine via the National Reconnaissance Office, the NRO. Both of these are like interesting, shocking even, and contribute to an environment of uncertainty. So at risk of rambling on too long here in the prologue, do either of you guys have reflections on that? Dave, you're closest to perhaps the pointy tip of the revenue spear here. What do you think?
Yeah, so you're referencing we had a European customer, and we had a well-scoped new project start. It was RDT&E, quick turn, needed new capability, deliver some prototypes, solve a problem, and the problem was related to the current European conflict. So the customer sentiment was essentially, we think we're going to look for a local European partner. The topic is a bit sensitive, and they're essentially saying the U.S. is seen sort of these days as a potentially unreliable or uncommitted partner to that conflict. Also, we're in a situation now where it's actually in question whether or not we're sharing this sort of information or intelligence amongst NATO or even Five Eyes allies, which was concerning to hear. But nevertheless, the new project we had getting ready to get started or kicked off is now probably going to a local European technology provider.
We saw other press announcements. Rheinmetall, a big, I think, German defense technology or defense vendor, is now slotting record sales and revenue numbers as the Europeans start spending more. I think probably no surprise, and that might be, the intention of some of these American policy shifts is to get the Europeans to spend more. But I do think that it's disheartening as a prospective partner of some of these European military establishments to have that be the reason why they don't want to transact with us. It has nothing to do with capability. It's simply political, cultural, I don't know, whatever sentiment.
We've talked about this a lot in a bunch of different settings. And in fact, Garrett, it wasn't that long ago that we were, having a casual conversation with a pretty senior retired DoD type who casually said in our conversation, I'm a neo-isolationist. Like I'm fully on board with that. And it's almost like we're going to test in the real space all of these international relations theories that we have held as bedrocks for such a long time and are very boring to talk about, but also very scary to watch fall apart. And so, as we retreat from soft power and from using these light touch and moneyed ways of influencing partners, we don't get to decide how they react to it. That is the danger of the game when you retreat from it, is you have less of a say in how your partners treat you if you don't bring anything to the table for them. We've seen it both ways. I mean, Garrett, you sent me that article about there's a recent large purchase of Anduril drones by United Kingdom for use in Ukraine.
Right.
So I certainly think you're going to see.
We talked about that last week. Yep.
Yeah, you'll see different versions of this in a case by case basis, but the certainty is gone. It's going to be every week waking up what happened this week, whether in the White House or on the internet or in some other place, and how does that affect the way our partners now view us? Garrett, you're a Marine. You and I both know this one well. When one Marine screws up somewhere in the world, it reflects on us. That's it. We own it. I came to terms with owning the reputation of the entire Marine Corps everywhere I go for the rest of my life.
Right.
No matter how far away.
Yeah. Are you saying Dave doesn't have that same level of emotional buy-in and sentiment with his Army affiliation? Are we somehow different? Are we better? I think that might be what you're saying.
I don't know about better. Probably worse, if I'm being honest, because it mostly comes up in the conduct of Marines in Okinawa.
Oh, sure.
Yeah. and then every time it's you can't have Marines here. I saw what you guys did in Okinawa.
Did you ever do time in Okinawa?
No, I only ever made it over there as a government staffer.
Yeah, I went through there once on a military, aircraft refueling, and that was the extent of my time in Okinawa. Yeah, you're right. Despite the fact that I have never been affiliated with any of the Marines goings on in Okinawa, we still own that reputation. I think that's what you're alluding to here, and that we don't have a choice in the world's reaction to what policy shifts mean for them in their local environment. Dave, is there ground to be made up with call it international buyers and markets, the Europeans? Obviously, we're still doing business with Europeans, even some within the same country and military structure as the customer reference that we were just alluding to. But what can we do? Is there something that young companies, can companies kind of bridge that gap despite shifts in the political and policy ecosystem?
Yeah, we're still doing business. By no means has business stopped or completely halted or all trust eroded. And there's recent news articles. Of potential continued Ukrainian aid or investment or from Uncle Sam. So there's definitely still business to be done there. I think that our plan or my plan is to become like a formal contractor inside these governments or partners. Like, we'll just open essentially the European version of our American-based company, and it will probably be full of Europeans that are seen as reliable, trusted technology partners, regardless of the political atmosphere.
Yeah. I mean, we can only do what we can do, I suppose, at the end of the day. Well, perhaps shifting off that topic and maybe orienting at stuff closer to home, and affected by the same policymaking establishment as the one driving our overseas, perception and presence. The Doge train rolls on. The Trump administration continues to exert its influence through the executive agencies. And Congress continues to do or not do its job, depending on how you perceive the situation. So, Simon, recurring topic here. You have predicted on an escalating basis the likelihood of gov shutdown. A couple of weeks ago, I think you expressed something like a 70-75% likelihood of moving into a government shutdown. That timeline is looming, right? It's this Friday, March 14th, is the timeline where Congress either needs to, settle things or move into government shutdown. Last week you said 90% likelihood that we move into gov shutdown. Give us an update. Are you amending that number? Are you feeling more confident than ever? Tell us what you think.
I've cooled off a lot. I'd put it at 50-50 right now. And this, like most things, it tightens up the closer you get to it and people start to realize the potential consequences. The original sort of assessment of things was, can you get a CR through a Republican House where the far right of the Republican Party is not interested in seeing some of these programs continue at Biden levels. And that has happened. President Trump pulled the House Republican caucus and whipped them hard. I think they had one vote, no vote, when they passed the full year CR through. That was Massey, who's very libertarian and votes his conscience on these things primarily. So that's headed to the House. That's headed to the Senate. That passed the House Tuesday. And the question now lays at the feet of the Democrats. Are they going to withhold their votes and shut down the government? Actually, that plays out tomorrow, right? They're going to do a cloture vote. And that's the only one that really matters. If you can get through cloture, which is 60 votes to start the debate on the bill, then you're good. As long as you can make it through that, then you just need a simple majority to pass it, and you're off to the races. So all eyes on Senate Dems.
I think you described the notion of full year CR as being a first of its kind. Maybe I'm wrong about that. Like
for DOD.
For DOD. Okay.
Yeah. For DOD. Other agencies have been through it before, but DOD's never had to go through a full year CR. So this is the CR that passed the House is unique in that regard. What's unique not only is a full year CR, but they had to put special provisions in it that you've never seen in a defense CR
like
before.
What? Like what?
The primary one is this idea around new starts. So traditional CRs prevent DOD from starting new procurements and new major programs. It is tied to the past year's funding. So it's meant to be a Band-Aid that stretches out the funding, and you don't do new stuff. You wait for Congress to figure it out. So Congress is acknowledging that's not going to happen. And they're going to need to give them some latitude for new starts and for new procurements like ships. Shipbuilding needs that authority to keep moving forward. So there's some language in the bill that directs the department to maintain spending at fiscal year 24 levels with some slight adjustments based on White House recommendations, again, focused on things like personnel and ships. And it also gives them authority to do new starts as long as they were provided for in the House and Senate versions of the fiscal year 25 bill. This is like super unusual. And it creates a lot of questions. Honestly, for me, it creates more questions than answers because there was no conference fiscal year 25 bill. So you have two different bills that provided for all kinds of new programs. And DoD is going to take last year's budget and do some new starts based off of this year's draft bills using last year's budget. But no. Yeah, go ahead, Dave. This is gets super deep real fast, and I know it's like annoying and complicated.
This is beltway esoterics in my
opinion. No, it's not. Here's the thing: it sounds like beltway esoterics. This is like life and death for all of our companies. There is no, it's not esoteric.
Which is why I've been annoying you about it all day. So I'll now annoy you about it very publicly, right? Because it's topical. We just spent an hour and a half this afternoon.
Absolutely.
We just spent an hour and a half this afternoon with one of our biggest customers, ensuring that we could protect the scope work through the shutdown, how they were going to be impacted by CR. So I feel like part of the problem is like you live up here in the stratosphere, but I don't build battleships, right? I live with individual program management offices, and how are they thinking about this? What do they think their constraints and limitations are, or their guidance is? Like, do you have recommendations of how this trickles down and actually impacts like an individual PM or program that we're working with, or that has plans for us this year?
So, and this is specific to our challenge, Dave, is that this CR problem, when they need to fix things, they're looking at big stuff like ships. And they're not looking at those of us that are in this non-traditional small category nearly as much. And so our PMs aren't able to draw guidance. They aren't able to draw congressional intent off of two draft bills, neither of which has become law. There's nothing really to point them to and say, hey, this is what you're supposed to be doing. This is how we show you like definitively that this is the priority that needs to be chased after and needs to be gotten after. When you do a draft appropriation bill, there's a report that comes with it. The report is where all the tables live. That's where all the line items are. That's where you're seeing really specifically what folks want to fund. A CR does not have a report. It does not have tables. And even if this like new start thing says, hey, look at the draft bills, those two draft bills have report tables that are billions and billions of dollars apart from each other. Like that is incredibly conflicting guidance. And there's no one from Congress is going to call down to your program manager and say, hey, make sure you're looking at this table. This is the thing I want you to spend it on. Not only because they can't, but there's just too many of them. Even if they wanted to and were like cleared hot by their boss to go reach into these program managers' lives, how many hundreds, thousands of program managers are there for the 10 appropriation staffers?
Well, so what it sounds like to me is that even though new starts in quotes can occur, which is important for smaller, new entrant companies like ours, it then becomes perhaps a matter of prioritization or reprioritization within program management portfolios. And Dave, is that what you guys have been kind of wrestling with this week and lately?
That's what we've been wrestling with is unless Simon tells me I'm wrong, I feel like the options are, and I feel like our government customers feel like the options are either one, reprioritization, which probably means something's going out, right? Or, kill something that's underperforming. Two, fund the same way you did last year, incremental funding and make a really good plan for, the start of the new fiscal year. Or three, ask one of the potential shelters, Small Business Administration, the AFWorks of the world, the DIUs of the world, for help in saying, like, we have this requirement to get this capability in the field from a small business, and we no longer have the resources we need to do that.
Yeah, so you're spot on, right? Because, here's the thing. A full year CR, what it really means is 6 months of budget. So all these program offices are about to be given half of their year's budget has been, sitting behind the imaginary glass, and it is tied to fiscal year 24 levels. There are certain places like DIU that get a slightly larger bump than everybody else when the CR hits. So they will have a little more flexibility with their cash, but everyone else is going to be told to do more with less. They're not going to be able to hide behind, honestly, the wall of we're just going to fund the same way we did in 24. That's what we're getting funding for. No way. New admin is going to be breathing down your neck to show that you're aligned with the new priorities, or we're going to take your money away. Right? You're either living under those 17 protected areas that we've talked about before, or you're inefficient. Let's trim this fat out. So you're going to see all your PMs, and this would be my advice for anyone in our space, get engaged hot and heavy with your PM right now, because they're going to be eating it from all sides. You want to give them an easy answer.
So, I mean, last week we joked a bit about how programs and portfolios need to start identifying as, Virginia class submarines and Southern Border and other. But joking aside, what I did want to get to was recommendations or kind of like tips, best practices. It sounds like one of them is aligning with stated or assumed priorities. The 17 protected categories that we're referencing is perhaps one of the ways to do that. Dave, what other kind of like, what are the tips, tricks, kind of best practices that you're deploying that other young companies might consider deploying?
Yeah, so both of you, this may be an eye roll for both of you, because I think you all have heard me talk about the recipe for baking the cake many times. I think, I honestly believe that every meaningful contract action that I've ever experienced or ever seen in our space, especially for smalls, comes at a very predictable recipe of needs or interest, requirements, funding, contract, and priority. And priority, honestly, funding can be challenging, but priority is always the hardest ingredient. Because even if you have all of the other four ingredients, and the user base loves it, and there are active requirements for it, and they even have money for it, prioritization internally with what these PMs or program offices or executive offices are asked to do is a knife fight. And you need to be in one of the top 3 or top 5 things. So I don't think that it actually changes the strategy. It just makes that prioritization piece harder, which means that you really need some weight behind from a geographic combatant command, from a senior commander within premier units, or deploying units within the formation to signal, no, we really need this now to force that prioritization.
Here's the thing: it's the attention economy, and I feel like it's a piece that we don't talk about enough. And I stole that phrase from you, Garrett, because it really encapsulates what I think is like the thick middle problem, which is there's a infinite number of awesome American defense tech companies solving hard problems that can help the warfighter. You're going to hit a point where there's just not enough money to go around, but there are more than enough requirements and priorities and people telling you to buy it. So how do you break through that sort of mental attention block that your program manager may or may not have? And that's why I think you see so much of, the events in DC and all these conferences and all of the different things that we get invited to, because that's what you're trying to generate. You're trying to generate brand recognition and a focus of attention on your stuff when that prioritization conversation ultimately comes around, because it will. Doesn't matter what you make, it's going to happen.
So this, at some level, this sounds like business as usual for young companies who have to always scrap for prioritization within the program offices that they're trying to land in with their new technology. So at some level, it's business as usual. It's scarcity as usual. So perhaps this will be an ongoing conversation about how to ramp up prioritization. I'll leave Dave with the last word here in just a second. But Simon, last week it was Virginia class submarines. What do you identify as this week? Has that changed? Missile defense.
I'm an autonomous software toolkit.
Okay, great. Cool. Heard. Dave, give you the last word here before we pivot to perhaps other innovative or creative front doors for young companies, but go for it.
Yeah, outside of the really common recommendation, which is early and meaningful engagement with your customer to make a plan, I think that the very tactical thing that you can do is all of the places that already have funding available, direct those to contract means or contract mechanisms that can survive regardless of the outcome on what happens on Friday. This is a great use for OTs. It's a great use for mature SBIR extension, SBIR phase 2 extensions, SBIR phase 3 contracts. Get the dollars obligated now, and that'll allow you to sort of weather the storm.
I mean, that's a great segue to where I want to go next, which is that SBIR and the front door, side door, however you want to think of it, for young entrants, non-traditional contractors trying to refine prototypes or deliver capability through sole source, innovative contracting front doors, side doors. This last week, we saw Senator Joni Ernst, who is a relatively loud and influential voice in circles around foreign policy, armed services policy, acquisitions policy. She deployed I don't know what to call this, floated a set of reform concepts around SBIR contracting reform. It was taking aim at kind of the early stage, the phase 1 level, with some amount of kind of problem solution orientation. It was aiming at reforming loopholes that allow the so-called SBIR mills to, just run rampant by winning, tens of awards and just draining a bunch of, waste dollars into coffers that go nowhere and don't develop any capability. And then, strengthening research provisions was one of her last ideas here. So I'm sure our producers will flash some of this graphic content up on the screen for the video inclined. But Dave, do you have any initial thoughts on general purpose SBIR reform, and perhaps, if useful, use that Senator Ernst proposal around what she's calling the Innovate Act as a means to kind of approach the topic? What do you think?
Yeah, so I really like it. I think everybody can agree that eliminating SBIR mills, things that fail to transition technologies and keep consuming SBIR funds, should go away. Easy win. I completely agree with that. I think the top point, or maybe the second point, was about scaling technology to bridge the valley. And it sort of takes like an, AFWorks, TACFI, STRATFI sort of model and says, all right, well, instead of investing in 1,000 SBIR phase 1s and 2s that may or may not transition, what if we pick the ones that are likely to transition and juice them and give them more ramp and give them more bridge?
Does that mean a more aggressive filtration process before awarding a phase 1, or moving from phase 1 to phase 2, or there's this notion of direct to phase 2 awards, and if any of this sounds, again, too esoteric for you, just do a quick search and get yourself educated. This is a major front door for the non-traditional set. But Dave, what does this mean? More aggressive filtration?
I think it's actually another down selection. I think what's being recommended here is both a smaller entry, so a pre-SBIR phase 1, like a $40,000 award just to get started with a 2 guys in the garage sort of situation, and then SBIR phase 2 performers. If I understand this document correctly, what we're suggesting is that then they compete based off their performance in SBIR phase 2 for so throw some gasoline on the fire. And really ramp up and help them with bridge to get across the valley. And I'm very for that. I think that TACFI and STRATFI and similar programs have been very successful. We've really appreciated and enjoyed building unique capability and capacity in TACFI and STRATFI at Reveal. The only problem that I have with that strategy is building the bridge from this side of the valley to the other side, I think, is actually less helpful than starting from the far side and working backwards. And it's probably, like, it may be an unpopular opinion. I'll probably get noted like crazy, but I actually think if we're going to pick SBIR phase 2s that are likely to transition and likely to be successful, even if we give them a ton of bridge, it's still very challenging for them to break in to an existing program that was planned and budgeted years ago. I would actually prefer that those SBIR dollars go to the procurement end, go to a program office, so they can, and with the requirement that they spend them on SBIR awardee companies to pull them across the valley as opposed to launch them. Because they're gonna run into the same problem as a lot of the current STRATFI awardees run into, which is, okay, we had a lot more ramp, we built a better thing, high TRL, high integration readiness. PM, I know you love it, it's ready to go. Hey, but this doesn't exactly fit my piece of the program. I didn't budget for this thing a couple of years ago. If they have those SBIR funds on the procurement end of things, then they can say, okay, now we can finish this capability so that it exactly matches my needs of this program, and start getting it out in the field. And
so just to call this out, in Senator Ernst's proposal here in the Innovate Act, it's calling this category of things strategic breakthrough awards. It's talking about raising the cap or the potential total volume of a SBIR Phase 2 award to $30 million. What you're saying is that instead of AFWorks or SoftWorks or whomever being kind of in control of who receives that award based on their award criteria, you would instead hand the check writing capability over to a program office for that $30 million Phase 2 award?
To the shoppers of the DoD, because what's required right now is a matching fund component, which is a great idea because it requires the shoppers of the DoD to say we will obligate funding to match because we're interested enough in deploying this capability that we'll have skin in the game. The problem is, where does that funding come from? That funding needed to have been planned and budgeted for at least a year, if not multiple years beforehand. So if instead of requiring the match from the PMO, what if you just gave them the money and then they can pick their own winners based off of the requirements of the programs?
But, like we were talking in the previous conversation about how we, the young non-traditional companies at the program office engagement level, need to take our knives in. It's a knife fight. It's a scrap and a hustle to get them to prioritize you in the right way. So what you're talking about is give the PMs an even larger slush fund to do with it what you will. I mean, would you tie it to, Phase 1 awardees or Phase 2 awardees, and then they are required to spend that money on Phase 2 awardees? Because otherwise, I can imagine it just getting sucked into the slush fund that is always just going to be spent on the general officer or the senior SES's favorite priority of the week.
Absolutely. Okay. And there's, must have an active SBIR Phase 2, or if you completed one in the last 6 months, and this PEO actual or this PEO, this program office is responsible for X amount of dollars to award to those SBIR Phase 2 companies to buy their capability and get it in the field.
Yeah, I mean, I like aligning that with that kind of true capability adoption pathway. Simon, you've spent time on the Hill. This is not the first time Congress has looked at reforming this process and other similar processes. I think you would be quick to make the point that this is just a proposal. This is not law. How do you view this set of proposals? What happens to this?
The first thing I want to say is that the thing that complicates Dave's thinking here is that he's making a lot of sense, and that's not how any of this is structured.
Right.
In reality, the Innovate Act, I've seen some of the testimony on it. I've been to a couple of different events where I've seen senators speak about it. And now I've read the text. It's actually just the reauthorization of the SBIR program, which has to happen. It happens on a regular basis. So Ernst sends it a pretty unique position in that she is the chair of the Small Business Committee, but she's also the chair of the Emerging Threats Subcommittee on the Armed Services side. So I think a lot of us in the defense space look at this as Senator Ernst in her armed services capacity, her defense capacity. But that's not what this is. This is a small business committee bill. And it has definitely some really interesting reforms for SBIR, specifically SBIR under DoD. But when we look at something like strategic breakthrough, what we're doing there is you're removing the limit on how high SBIRs can go and also removing the need for a waiver for DoD to do that. But you're not really restructuring where any of this money comes from. The SBIR program has $2.5 billion. About $1 billion of that is DoD. We're less than half, but we are the larger chunk. But we're less than half of SBIR for the entire government. So we're not special. There's a lot of stuff we're not and we are at the same time, right? Because the strategic breakthrough thing doesn't look like it applies to anyone else. So I think this actually does become law for sure because it is the actual reauthorization for all of SBIR. And I think Senator Ernst sits on enough relevant committees to really shepherd through these reforms. But the structural problems that Dave is talking about, I don't know how you get to those with something like this, right? This is a program that governs how all federal agencies contribute research dollars to small business programs. It's not a DoD thing. DoD is directed by the Small Business Administration to cough up some of their RDT&E dollars for SBIR purposes. So each service has a ton of latitude on how much money they give. They have a minimum amount they're supposed to give, but most of them give more. They don't have an upper limit. They could give way more if they really want to. They could lean much harder into SBIRs. And to Dave's point, they could start aligning this stuff right now. if they wanted to.
So Dave's
kind of up to services to do.
Dave, are you laying claim to last word here? Cool. I'll pivot. Go for it.
Yeah, I knew you were getting ready to pivot, and I want the last word on the SBIR topic, so that I feel passionately about.
Yes.
So I even though it is a reauthorization, I was happy to see it based off of. There's one line in there. I think this is how it starts. Inconsistencies between the SBIR sitter timeline for broader DoD budgeting timeline is the real crux of the issue. And the solution that I'm proposing, this is how it starts, right? Recognizing that the problem is the difference in timeline between SBIR ramp up new capability and budgeting to accommodate that capability on the program office side. So I actually really like it.
Yeah. Well, we look forward to improvements and reforms and encourage Senator Ernst and all of those lawmakers involved with reauthorization and upgrading of the program to get that thing going. I'm going to hard pivot into a couple of wrap-up topics before we wrap for the day or the week here. First off, shameless plug, Reveal was recently listed as one of the top 50 kind of rising defense technology players on one of these lists. This is the American Dynamism 50. This is Andreessen Horowitz, a West Coast, very notable major player in the venture capital ecosystem. Their American Dynamism Fund, run by David Yulovich and I think formerly by Catherine Boyle, who may have recently left their team, is calling out 50 companies that they think are rising and shaping the way that defense is positioned going forward. So it's exciting on the one hand to be listed in a list like this, but at the same time there are a lot of lists like this. And in one case, I remember casting a little bit of shade at the Silicon Valley Defense Group because they didn't list Reveal. I pounded the table really hard, but then I realized, wait a sec, everybody's got their lists. What is this? Just kind of like a big virtue signal in the market. I don't know what to make of this. Simon, do lists like this, do you think this actually impacts, stuff in the real world, or is this just the industry and the self-licking ice cream cone that it can sometimes be just being itself?
So I feel the same way about these lists that I feel about the infinite number of DC-based events that don't seem to be business development events. They just seem to be popularity contests, and which is to say that I hate them unless I'm on them. In which case, thank you so much for having me. You made the right decision.
If I didn't,
so proud of everyone involved.
If I didn't say this already, Mark, Ben, the team over at Andreessen Horowitz, thank you for including us. We're deeply honored and grateful. Thank you.
As the only Montana company on the list.
That's right.
Very
proud.
Montana.
That's right. The only.
Yeah. But I think this all ties though, right? This ties to the earlier piece about DoD prioritization and attention economy. Because I think this stuff is high risk, high reward if you're a small company. You can easily find yourself spending a ton of resources to make sure you're getting on these lists and going to these events and just draining your money for no really definable return on investment.
Sure.
Until you hit that point where you land this big contract because you are the only person that they're thinking about. So it's a real question. Can you play that game so well that when contract award time comes, they believe you're the greatest thing in the world because they can't take a step without hearing about you. So it goes both ways. From the actual attendance side of things, every single time I go to any event, I am underwhelmed and tired immediately. I meet 6 people and I'm like, oh God, I have to go home. I need to recharge everything.
Dave, none of the people Simon talks to actually write checks and buy things. So I'd love to hear from you whether lists like this matter in the actual real world buyer environment. Do people care?
I don't think anybody's ever looked at me and said, Dave, let's do this project, or let me procure some of your capability because you're on the list, right, of a publication that I largely, that I've never read or don't have on my desk. I think it's all generally good. Sort of to Simon's point, it's generally good. Like my presence at a trade show is generally good.
Sure.
the same way, like you all know how I feel about trade shows. I hate trade shows. You stand behind a booth. You get 100 business cards. There's folks walking around like collecting Beanie Babies and aviator sunglasses and pins. And maybe you have one or two meaningful conversations. The only reason that I engage in them and find value in them is because for a company like ours, if we have 10 customers and we need 10 meetings, and those folks are in Tampa and Colorado and California and Washington, D.C., et cetera, then we can knock out, and if we schedule them ahead of time, we can knock out 10 meaningful like interactions over the course of a couple of days. That's why people go to trade shows. It's not so that you can hand out lickies and chewies. It's so that you can knock out 10 meetings without traveling to 5 different places.
Lickies and chewies.
Yeah, dude.
Incredible.
What are we handing out at our booths?
Like, yeah, dude. What do we have that we can lick and
nothing?
Chew?
There is nothing. Like, if you're looking for Beanie Babies or mints, move on. Don't stop at the reveal booth. I think we've got stickers.
So here, hold on. It makes me think about a thing, though. Because
I think maybe we need to start including lickies and chewies, whatever the hell those are. That sounds awesome.
That's above my pay grade. But it does make me think about the difference between like trade shows and a lot of the newer events that you see that are a little more focused on this non-traditional defense tech startup space. Because Dave is correct, we use some of these bigger traditional events as like meeting spaces for a very geographically separated customer set. And then everyone complains like, oh, the programming's terrible, and this thing is like 6 days, and there's so much dead space. The dead space is useful because that's when you go off with your customers or your buddies and you can sit down and have a little bit of your own time. Whereas I think a lot of the events that we see coming online now are these like super dense, everything is like interesting, meaningful, impactful. So there's no space for me to peel off a customer because he wants to sit here and watch the whole event because there's a lot of good stuff happening. So it becomes this, it's very chicken or the egg, no matter, you're damned if you do, if you're damned if you don't.
Yeah.
It's fascinating.
I'll say this, and going back maybe half a topic to the notion of a list like this, Andreessen Horowitz American Dynamism 50. I think that this is likely a very good signal, especially in an environment that is relatively uncertain. Geopolitics are shifting, tectonic plate shifts, all that stuff, potential reductions in budget, et cetera, et cetera. Gov shutdown on the horizon, all of that stuff. This is actually a signal that the risk capital, venture capital ecosystem is still interested in and engaged with the defense technology arena, which I think everybody would agree is incredibly important. This is leveraging the American entrepreneurial, innovative, creative, gung-ho, get-it-done spirit on behalf of the national defense. I would say that's an incredibly positive signal. So despite some of the earlier snark and the shade casting at lists and organizations generating lists and convening events, trade shows, and the like, I am grateful that there are entities that are deploying real material capital and true social capital and credibility to advance the national security. So I think that's a good signal. I've got perhaps one last thing here before we wrap, but Simon, it looked like maybe you wanted to chime in.
Yeah, I just wanted to make like one quick comment and break character a little bit, because there's a lot to be optimistic about in our space versus everybody else right now. I think we're all very concerned about tightening budgets and shifting sands of where everybody stands, but 160,000 people lost their jobs last month. The stock market is in free fall, and relatively speaking, the DoD budget is untouched. We continue to be counter-cyclical to the rest of like the economic world. And if I was an investor, I'd absolutely be looking at that. We are holding much steadier than basically everybody else. The worse things get for them, generally the better things get for us, and vice versa, right? Like we thrive in these chaotic times.
Yeah.
Liquor and American defense tech. That's liquor, gold, and American defense tech. I like it.
Tariffs on everything else. Yeah. Here, another list came out the other day. I think it's actually a far more materially significant list than the ones that we were referencing before. However, as I noted, this is all goodness, and it's I think indicative of a rising tide and all ships and all that stuff. But it is the release of the 25.1 AFWERX strategic funding increase STRATFI contract list, which, as we know, having been in a previous awardee and currently on STRATFI contract now, is extremely significant. There were, I think, 15 or 16 companies listed in the Air Force award announcements. We don't rub up against many of these except perhaps Firestorm Labs. So congrats to them and everybody else on this list. And then I want to say 8 or 9 Space Force companies also in the same announcement. This is huge. I think the fiscal year 25 list, which this one is, and the award program was similar to previous years, where it's a match mechanism for a total potential award volume per award of $60 million. I mean, this is real contracting, SBIR extension money that's coming to non-traditional contractors like us. And again, this is all aimed at what I can only assume are true problem sets in need of real solutions with identified programmatic landing places on the other side. So speaking for our company, we have 3 or 4 different program offices associated with our STRATFI award that will end up being the adopters and fielders of our technology on the back end. It's far more credible, sure, than earlier stage awards, straight line SBIR 2s and phase 1 awards, certainly, and others of the front and side doors. But Dave, anything to say about this? I mean, this is maybe evidence of the insulation of the non-traditional contracting side of the innovation economy and defense, in contravention to the kind of the tidal shift around DOGE and cutting budget and headcount and all that stuff. What do you think about this?
Absolutely agree. Positive indicator. Positive indicator. I think there's really interesting companies on the list. You talked about one of them. There's another one on the list. This is what makes me think that STRATFI awardees are very credible. Like I'll add that what it takes to win one of those is a pretty dense set of requirements, right? You need a program office, a shopper of the DoD saying they're going to buy the thing when you're done. You need an end user saying that they need this thing right now.
Yep.
You need a whole bunch of signatures basically proving that it's a good idea, which you don't need in the other parts of the SBIR program. So the list of awardees is actually usually pretty sort of the who's who of up and coming defense tech firms. One of them I'm particularly interested in, Ditto Live.
Sure.
So my my only Navy SEAL friend, Mike Herman, that works for Ditto Live. Simon, I think you've met him. I'm interested in them, and I think Reveal's also interested because it's software that it's sort of seeking to eliminate cloud as the single point of failure between edge devices.
That's right.
It makes it makes applications that are cloud optional. It's like automatic, direct, peer-to-peer mesh network sort of thing. And Mike can correct me if I'm wrong here, but I think this started with like flight attendants and having to share data, information, and environment, on a commercial aircraft where you can't, where there's constraints and limitations of what you can do. So I'm really interested in what that looks like when you're moving lots of data around locally on a peer-to-peer mesh network, and what that can do for us and others. So I think we're getting it right if we did a STRATFI in companies like Firestorm and Ditto.
Yeah, I think so. And maybe another call out here. We don't touch them in a partnering context, but Albedo is a fellow portfolio company with some of this. We share investors with Albedo and others. I do view this, and again, I'm biased. We're biased, that this is a credibility list, and is an indicator of future success. I think sometimes we perceive a STRATFI awardee list as the DoD picking future winners. In other words, this is the set of companies that may be doing bigger and more important and more substantial things in future. Again, lists are lists. This one is attached to actual programmatic spend on the back end of real R&D contracts with real customers lined up against it. So I think this is yet another good signal and a very credible and an important list.
Strong agree.
Cool. Well, Simon, any last words here before we wrap?
Just want everyone to know that we had several more important topics, such as Batman, memes about the vice president, lots of important stuff that didn't get touched. So please reach out. I have more thoughts to share. There's just not enough time.
Yeah, there isn't enough time. Send your favorite memes, I guess, tag us in the socials.
Just send them to me directly. These guys don't need them. It's mostly me. Yeah, they don't need them.
Simon, I'm grateful that you're representing your church, Truth Cult. Is that the church you attend? Is that a Richmond?
No, it's a
DC,
DC
evangelical outfit.
It's a DC hardcore band. You can also reach out to me about that if you want to talk about it. weird punk music.
Okay.
I'm multifaceted, Garrett. I'm not just a Marine with weapons on his wall. I also have a collection of T-shirts.
You're a complex Renaissance man. Yes,
exactly.
That's how I talk about you in private company. Yeah. Okay. Thanks, guys, for an awesome conversation. Just a couple of notes here as we wrap up and send everybody into their Thursdays, Fridays, and weekends. In future versions of the pod, we're going to be inviting a rotating cast of call it fourth wheel co-hosts for outside commentary, so you're not getting the homogenous reveal staff only perspective on what's going on in the world, that we get some true outsider expert opinion. So if you have ideas about who might be a great fourth wheel, send them our way. Feel free to nominate yourselves if that is you. And then please reach out, follow us in the socials, on the podcasting and video platforms. We're eager to engage, to expand the conversation, and to ensure that we're hitting important topics of the week and the day, to stay up to date and provide meaningful commentary that both encourage as well as entertain and inform. So thanks for joining us this week, and we'll see you next time.